So my reading also comes from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I saw a TED Talk by her, and she is really an amazing woman. And this is what she has to say about feminism. Some people ask, why the word feminist? Why don't you just say that you're a believer in human rights? Or something like that. Well, because that would be dishonest. Feminism is, of course, part of human rights in general. But to choose to use the vague expression human rights is to deny the specific and particular problem of gender. It would be a way of pretending that it was not women who for centuries have been excluded. It would be a way of denying that the problem of gender targets women. That the problem was not about being human, but specifically about being a female human. For centuries, the world divided human beings into two groups and then proceeded to exclude and oppress one group. It is only fair that the solution to the problem acknowledges that. Sometimes when I look at myself, my younger self, around women's issues, I'm a little disappointed. Mike and I were married in 1973, and that was right at the height of the second feminist movement, the first being in the 1920s. Well, both of our mothers had full-time jobs, so you might imagine that we would have a model for a modern, at that time, marriage in a two-income family. But both of our mothers did 100% of the domestic chores. They did all the laundry, the cooking, the dishes, cleaning the house, scheduling, transporting, etc. I didn't think this was particularly fair at the time, but, you know, I was never angry about it. And when we were first married, I followed that role model. I just took upon myself to start doing 100% of the domestic chores. Now, before long, Mike and I worked out a more equitable distribution for two working adults. And he does most of the cooking now, but it makes me pause when I realize that thinking of myself as a feminist, expecting to share responsibilities and all that, it was easier to accept in my mind than in my actions. And it wasn't just seeing myself as a perfect wife or whatever at home. It was also how I saw myself at work. One of my first real jobs was as a teller in a bank. Now, the manager of the bank, he was a friendly guy, but he spent most of his day out drinking with his clients. And when he returned, his secretary would tell him how she had handled all of his phone calls, how she handled all the loans, she had the papers typed up, and really, all of us knew that she was doing his job, but she was not getting his pay or his status. We knew that. We knew that she could do it, but we weren't angry about it. It seems amazing to me now. We must have been somewhat influenced, maybe even intimidated to a degree, by the opposition of the feminists that time. They called feminists man-haters, you know, ugly women. And we were all just newly married. We wanted just to be nice wives, and it didn't really fit a mental image of ourselves as feminists. I think we really just took progress for equality of women for granted then. I clearly remember that I fully agreed with the Equal Rights Amendment. I mean, it was just common sense that women would be given equal rights. I was so happy when the Congress easily passed that amendment and the states were ratifying it until it hit a snag. And it became increasingly difficult to get it ratified, and it was around that time that I realized that the ERA could possibly, and even probably, not be ratified by the United States of America. It was There were many more role models for me, for women at that time, as feminists that I could relate to, and my own interpretation of the term feminist simply became a person who promoted equal rights for women, and that I could identify with. It was Phyllis Schlafly who entered the fight in the late 70s and became the mastermind behind the national campaign to stop states from ratifying the ERA, who proclaimed, "The Equal Rights Amendment will take away the right of a wife to be supported by her husband. It will take away the right of a wife to be provided a home by her husband. It will take away her right to have her husband support her minor children." I finally realized this was propaganda. It was only meant to strike the fear of loss, status, and financial stability. I simply have never equated granting equal rights to women with taking away rights from either men or women. By the way, Schlafly died in 2016, but not before endorsing Donald Trump. And it isn't surprising because she has been known her whole life as a conservative activist. She was the founder of the Eagle Forum, a conservative pro-family interest group. I eventually came to understand the plight of women around the world and more fully realize the imbalance of power and opportunity. What a difficult road we have ahead of us, because passing laws to give women's rights does not mean that society will accept them. That takes a much longer time, even when people are paying attention. Women's right to vote, to own property, to have equality in marriage, in the workplace, in government, politics, the right to make decisions about their body, and on, it's had progress and setbacks. But that same old tactic is still happening, because we have a current conservative movement that claims that when you give the right to women, the right and the ability to talk about sexual abuse and sexual harassment, you're somehow taking away the man's right to live in a society where they're not falsely accused. It seems to me that in this battle between truth and propaganda, I can't just sit on the sidelines believing in equality for women. Just as Mike and I both came to the realization that simply believing that climate change is happening is not enough. In both cases, you have to take action and you have to let people know what you believe. The only way to move forward in both areas is with grit and resilience. This is what I heard Reverend Rachel Tabor Hamilton of Trinity Episcopal Church of Everett. She talked about that Thursday night at the vigil for the victims of the shooting in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Temple. We need grit and resilience to fight religious intolerance, but we also need it to achieve gender equality. We have to speak up. We have to make phone calls, join in demonstrations, participate in politics, and keep the attention of people until finally more people will really listen and there are changes in laws. But we're going to need more grit and resilience to attain a cultural change in the minds and the hearts. In the midst of all this, I proudly proclaim myself a feminist as well as a climate activist. But I also identify as a humanist because I love my husband, my son, my grandson, all the men in this room. And I really think that gender equality is for both sexes. It's just and fair, and it's what we need.